I just got a really cool message a couple of days ago from one of my students, Eason. He said that he just got hired at Google. He said in order to get the job, he had to do an entire job interview in English. And I was really impressed by that. And so I said, well, what part of my lessons were the most useful for you, and how did you go about practicing? And so he sent me a whole other message telling me what he did. And I think it'd be useful for us to go through it together to see how he reached that level of English. Now, if you go through this message, you can see that there's three key things that he did. The first thing was that he consistently spent time every single day practicing English, whether that was right before he went to bed at night or if he had a little bit of extra time at work. He just made sure that he did it every single day. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, yeah, I know that, I've heard that before, but I'm really busy. But here's the thing, how bad do you want it? If you want something bad enough, you will make the time to make sure that that thing gets done. Now, everybody has different goals, but if you want to be fluent enough to be able to understand what a native speaker is saying, or to have a conversation with a native speaker, or to get a job that requires you to speak English, you're going to have to practice every single day. There's just no other way around it. Now, I'm not saying you have to practice an hour every single day. It could be 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day, but you do have to make sure that you're consistent and that it's every single day. Now, the second thing that he did was that he would mimic things that he heard me say. So he would mimic phrases like kind of or at that time. Now, notice he didn't memorize a bunch of grammatical rules. He just watched me say things and he observed how I put sentences together. And he watched it over and over and over again to the point that he noticed there was patterns in how I was doing that. And then by mimicking that over a long period of time, he was able to follow those same patterns and make sentences of his own and do it without even thinking about it. Now, the reason it's important that he modeled his speech patterns off of a native speaker is because when it comes to grammar in English, there's almost an exception for every rule. And on top of that, native speakers will break the rules all the time. So it's not really about what's 正确, it's about what's 正常. And what I mean by 正常 is knowing how most native speakers will put a sentence together instead of memorizing how a textbook says a perfect sentence should look. Because it's not about making sure not to break rules. It's about learning how to break the rules the way that a native speaker does. Now, you may think to yourself, how am I going to know how to break the rules like a native speaker? Well, that goes back to the first thing that we talked about, which is making sure that you practice every day. Specifically, listening to content in English every day. Because by doing that, you're going to have an experience every time you do it of knowing what an English speaker says in a given situation or talking about a specific subject. And by doing that every single day, you're going to accumulate those experiences to the point that you're going to know the way that a native speaker would say something in a certain situation. And that's the key to not having to translate things in your head or to have 英文脑. The third big thing that he did was he said he naturally learned words by watching the content, because throughout each lesson, the same words would pop up over and over again. So you don't have to write down words on a flashcard and try and memorize them that way. Because if you do it like that, then the only thing you're going to do is know what the word means. You're not going to actually know how to use it. Because if you see a word used in a sentence by a native speaker, you're going to understand the emotion that the native speaker was feeling when they said it, and you're going to understand what situation a native speaker would use that word. And if you understand those two things, you'll know how to use that word for yourself. Like, for example, I have a friend that says 很贱, like 他很贱欸, all the time. And at first I wasn't sure what it meant. So I said, hey, what does 很贱 mean? And so he tried to explain it to me, and I realized I couldn't really directly translate that into English. So I said, okay, well, tell me a bunch of situations where you would use 很贱. And so he told me a bunch of situations. And by him doing that, I understood the emotion behind it and what situations a native speaker would use that word. And because of that, I was able to learn how to use the word for myself. I didn't have to write it down on a flashcard. So just remember, 1, make sure that you practice every single day. It doesn't mean you have to practice for a long time every day, but you have to practice every single day. 2, don't try and memorize a bunch of fancy grammatical rules. Just understand the basics and focus on putting your sentence together the way that a native speaker does. Remember, it's not about not breaking rules. It's about learning how to break the rules like a native speaker does. And 3, don't try and memorize vocabulary by writing it down on a flashcard and just looking at it over and over again. Because all you're going to do is just learn what the word means. You won't know how to use it. Instead, see how the word is used in content naturally. It'll pop up a bunch of times and you'll be able to understand how to use it not just what it means. There's a part of Eason's message that I think perfectly describes what happens if you do this stuff. He said that he feels like English really isn't that hard, and he's a lot more willing and a lot more confident when it comes to talking to native speakers in English. And if you do this stuff, it'll help you hit whatever your goal is, whether that's being able to have a conversation with a native speaker, whether that's being able to sound like a native speaker, or getting a job that requires you to speak English.
如果你喜欢我的影片，你可以在下面的链接留下你的 email， 有新的影片我就会寄给你哦。